Hello everyone, welcome to another video on the channel, welcome to another Gran Turismo 7 opinion piece, and in this one we're going to take a look at the categories of Group 1 and Group 2. I'm going to give you my thoughts, my ideas and my opinions on what I would do to reclassify these cars if I happen to be put in charge. Now, at the moment Gran Turismo 7 has Groups 1, 2, 3 and 4, encompasses about 120 different race cars, and I think it's fair to say that in each of them, but particularly Group 1 and Group 2, there's a lot of cars that have just been kind of shoehorned in together despite having very, very different characteristics. Cars that would never be on the same racetrack together, and they've had to kind of do weird stuff with them to try and make them kind of half competitive with each other, and it could lead to some very, very messy racing. Just take a look at Group C cars mixing with LMP1 hybrids. It makes the balance of performance almost impossible for PD to get right, and it just means that people are not driving certain cars because they're just not competitive. I don't know why PD limit themselves to just the 4 categories when it make a lot more sense to kind of split them up and have more varieties out there. Make it easier to BOP, give the game a little bit more variety. So that's what we're going to do in this video. First up, we're going to take a look at Group 2, currently made up of 9 different cars. 3 2016 GT500, 3 2008 GT500, a DTM car, the McLaren F1 and the CLK from Mercedes. For the first group I'm going to create is we're going to separate the 3 2016 cars. So this is going to be Group 2 GT500. We're going to have the Nissan GTR, the Lexus RCF and the Honda NSX. Now PT do occasionally actually do a Group 2 race with just these 3 cars featuring, so maybe they kind of know themselves that these cars do need to split up. Now you're probably going, where has the Toyota Supra GT500 came from, Womble? Well, what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to bring that up from Group 3. Because if you take a look at the current GT500 Toyota Supra racing in the 2023 Championship, it bears a very, very striking resemblance to the current Group 3 car in GT7. If you take a look at the GT300 Toyota Supra, it bears a very striking resemblance to the FT1, so the Group 3 Supra for me is actually the Group 2 car, so for that reason I'm going to bring it up into Group 2. PD can easily adjust the values of the downforce to make it competitive, and we have a very nice group of 4 cars for Group 2 GT500. The next group is a fairly obvious one. It's a no-brainer really. It's going to be Group 2 GT500 Classic. It's going to be made up of the 3 2008 cars in the game at the moment, the Nissan GTR, the Honda NSX and the Lexus SC430. Now in the current balance of performance for Group 2, you very rarely see these cars getting used because they're about a second off the pace of the 2016 cars. In order to make them anywhere near competitive, they're given an additional about 100 to 150 brake horsepower through the balance of performance, but even so, you still very rarely see them in a Group 2 race anytime it comes around. So it just makes a lot more sense just to separate them into their own subcategory and let them race each other. I believe from the elite car list there's possibly more classic GT500 cars coming as well, so instead of just shoehorn them into the current Group 2 category, separate them up into a classics and let them be joined there. Next up we have a group that we're going to create from the rest of the Group 2 cars, and also by bringing in some Group 3 cars as well who are a little bit of outliers in that category. It's going to be Group GTLM. It's going to be made up of the McLaren F1 Longtail, the Mercedes CLK from the current Group 2, and from Group 3 I'm going to bring up the McLaren F1 GTR, the Ford GTLM test car and the Aston Martin DBR9 GT1. Now these 5 cars are just classic examples of why having such limited categories in the game doesn't work, because they've been shoehorned in, they just don't really fit. No matter what they do with the balance performance, it doesn't really work in order to make them competitive. So yeah, limit the groups, make them smaller, bring some of these cars that are never used in their current categories into their own separate categories, and give the game a little bit more variety. I think these 5 cars would work very well together. Obviously there would be some adjustments in terms of downforce levels and power levels, and some work on the balance performance to make them all competitive with each other. But I'm going to tell you this, see, if you don't run balance performance, these 5 cars are actually quite competitive with each other in that form, because they're all cars that have got very good top speed. And yeah, I just think it would be a nice category, something different. It's certainly what I would do to try and make these cars viable in the game, useful in the game for some way, shape or form, because as it stands they're just not used. So get them out of the current categories they're in into something else and give us some new categories to race in. Let's move on to Group 1 then. Group 1, if Group 2 was a mess, then Group 1 is a hot mess because we have so many different characteristics and types of car in Group 1. It's just crazy. And again, PD know this to an extent. It's why they sometimes separate out the LMP1 hybrids, or they separate out the Group C cars. So let's see what we can do with this. The first one is going to be very obvious. And as I said, PD actually sometimes do this by just giving us the Group C cars to use. So Group 1C, the Nissan R92, the Subaru Mercedes, the Jaguar XJR9, the Mazda 787B, and the Porsche 962. Now, as it stands, these 5 cars, although they're very similar to each other, are not particularly well balanced with each other, and it's really to do with the top speed. We had the race at Le Mans fairly recently, and the dominant car was the Nissan R92. The Mazda 787B wasn't too far behind it, but they had a much greater top speed advantage over the other 3 cars. The Mercedes was very, very quick through the corners, so could somewhat compete. But I think if you went to a normal track, I think maybe Le Mans was a little bit of an outlier, just because of the long straights there, and there being so many of the long straights as well. But it should be fairly easy to get these 5 cars balanced with each other, and yeah, just separate them. It's very silly that they're racing with LMP1 hybrids at times. It's an absolute no-brainer. Group 1C. Next up, we're going to have Group 1 Vision Gran Turismo, or Group 1 VGT. Now, the most telling thing about this is that when I put this video together and I was putting these screenshots together, 7 out of these 8 cars do not have a custom livery, which just tells me that PD have never given me a reason to actually drive any of these cars. Whenever a Group 1 race comes up, none of them are competitive. The most competitive one is the Mazda LM55, sometimes the Tomahawk as well, but in general, anytime you go to a Group 1 race, these cars are just not used. You'll never ever see them. It's 8 cars in the category and they're just never used. So get them out of there, give them their own category, again work on that balanced performance and give people a reason to drive some of these cars, because they'll look amazing. They actually, most of them drive really nicely as well, but I'll guarantee you that 99% of the people playing sport mode have never driven any of these cars, so it just makes a lot of sense. It's a no-brainer. Just create their own separate category, Group 1 VGT. And here is the one where I'm not convinced this is the right way to go, but at the moment we'll just have Group 1 LMP. So it's going to be made up of the hybrids and the non-hybrids, and this one would still be a little bit of a mess. I did consider separating these cars out into their own categories again, but I just didn't really know where to go. You just end up with like very, very small categories, 2 cars here, 1 car there. So I'm going to lump the 8 of them together, and it'd be up to PD to try and balance these cars. What I would do is I would kind of make the hybrids about 5 miles an hour slower than the non-hybrids on the straights. So the hybrids would have the acceleration out the corners, but the non-hybrids would have the top end down the straights as well. I think it'd be a very, very difficult group for PD to get these balanced completely. In terms of, we've got the GR10 Toyota, the hypercar. Perhaps if more hypercars come in the future, you then separate them into their own category. But at the moment, I'm going to keep the 8 of them together. It's not ideal, but maybe there would be some kind of way to get these cars balanced better than what they currently are. But that is my ideas, my suggestions, what I would do if I was put in charge of reclassifying Group 1 and Group 2 in Gran Turismo 7 at the moment. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think this is a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Would you do something different? What would you do with the LMP cars? Would you keep them all together, or would you just have like maybe a separate one for the kind of the hybrids and a separate one for the non-hybrids? It's an interesting one, definitely one of the ones I wasn't quite as certain as what I would do with them as I was for most of the other groups. But yeah, I think this is definitely something that needs to happen. I think there's too many limitations when the groups are just too big like that, shoehorned in together. The balance of performance suffers badly for it as well. Cars are never used, and I think there's just so many more options out there for PD to do to kind of give us more variety in the game, give us more reasons to drive some of these cars, and you know, overall just create a better overall package. But as I said, let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Goodbye now.